You're sitting alone in a small room and nobody has spoken to you in 3 days. Not because you're being punished exactly. Not because you did something illegal. You just stopped existing to everyone around you. Nobody looks at you. Nobody answers when you speak. You could scream and it would be like screaming into a wall. And here's the part that should scare you. Your brain processes this exact experience. Being ignored, being cut off from the group, the same way it processes a broken bone. Same regions light up, same alarm bells, not a metaphor. An actual measurable physical injury that happens without anyone laying a finger on you. Now imagine that instead of 3 days, it's forever. No tribe, no fire, no food source, no protection. Dropped into a world already trying to kill you in 100 different ways, completely alone. For most of human history, that wasn't a punishment reserved for the worst criminals. It was, in many groups, considered worse than death. So what actually happened when someone got kicked out? And why does a threat that can't cut you, can't poison you, can't maul you in the night, still register in your body as one of the deadliest things that could ever happen to you? Let's start with the obvious question. Why would exile even be dangerous? You're not being hunted, you're not being poisoned, you're just alone. But alone for most of human existence was a death sentence with a delay. A single human being without a group, in the Pleistocene, had almost no chance of surviving long term. You can't watch for predators while you sleep. You can't carry enough food while also gathering more. You can't fight off an infection, deliver a baby, or recover from a broken leg without someone else's hands. Anthropologists studying groups like the Hadza and the hoansi have found that solitary survival essentially doesn't happen in the historical record. Not because nobody ever tried, because it didn't work. The people who ended up alone didn't start new lives elsewhere. They just disappeared from the record entirely, which is exactly what you'd expect if the outcome was quick and quiet death. This is why so many ancient and traditional societies didn't bother with prisons. Why build a cage for a rule breaker when the wilderness itself will finish the sentence for you? Among several indigenous Australian groups, one of the most feared punishments wasn't physical violence at all. It was a formalized act of social exile, sometimes called pointing the bone. The community would gather, declare the person cast out, and from that point on, treat them as though they were already dead. No food shared, no conversation, no eye contact. And here's the part that still puzzles researchers. People who underwent this ritual sometimes died within days or weeks, with no injury, no poison, no detectable illness. Some doctors who studied these cases in the 20th century coined the idea of psychogenic death, essentially the body shutting itself down under the belief that survival was no longer possible. Whether that belief was medically justified didn't matter. The nervous system reacted as if it were. Your body, it turns out, doesn't fully distinguish between "I've been abandoned" and "I am actively dying." For most of your ancestors' history, those two things were the same sentence. The ancient Greeks formalized a milder version of this same idea in Athens, a practice called ostracism. Once a year, citizens could scratch a name onto a broken piece of pottery, an ostracon, and if enough votes piled up against one person, that person was expelled from the city for 10 years. Not executed, not imprisoned, just removed from the group. And the Athenians who designed this system understood something instinctively that we're only now proving in labs. For a social creature, banishment doesn't need to include violence to function as a devastating punishment. Losing your place in the group was punishment enough. So here's where it gets stranger, because this isn't just an ancient custom that faded away. It's wired directly into your brain right now, today, in 2026, reading this on a screen. In 2003, a researcher named Naomi Eisenberger ran an experiment that has become one of the most cited studies in social neuroscience. She had participants play a simple ball-tossing game inside an MRI scanner, except the game was rigged. At some point, the other players just stopped throwing the ball to them. No explanation, no confrontation, just quiet exclusion. And the brain scans showed something remarkable. The same region that activates during physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex, lit up during social rejection almost identically to how it lights up when your hand touches something hot. Being excluded from a game you knew wasn't even real still registered, neurologically, as an injury. Your brain didn't evolve a separate system for social pain because social pain used to be a preview of physical death. If the group didn't want you, the group wasn't going to feed you, warm you, or warn you when something was creeping up behind you in the dark. Rejection was the early warning system for extinction. And it gets even more specific than that. Studies on ostracism, led by researchers like Kipling Williams, found that even a completely anonymous, meaningless act of exclusion, being left out of a computer game by players you'll never meet, who don't even know your name, is enough to spike cortisol, lower mood, and trigger measurable distress within seconds. Seconds. Your nervous system doesn't wait around to evaluate whether this particular instance of rejection is actually life-threatening. It just assumes the worst because for hundreds of thousands of years, assuming the worst was the only strategy that kept your ancestors' genes in the pool. The ones who shrugged off exclusion, who felt fine being cast out, who didn't experience that gut punch of dread when the group turned cold toward them. Those people didn't reliably survive long enough to pass that indifference on to you. You are, quite literally, descended from the individuals who found rejection unbearable. But surviving exile wasn't always about the danger from the outside. Sometimes it was about what exile revealed about your own group. In several hunter-gatherer societies studied by anthropologists like Christopher Boehm, banishment wasn't reserved only for thieves or murderers. It was frequently used against a very specific kind of person, the individual who tried to dominate everyone else. Bullies, hoarders, anyone who tried to grab more status, more food, more control than the group was willing to tolerate. Boehm's research suggests that early human societies were, in a sense, aggressively egalitarian, and they enforced that equality with the ultimate deterrent. Step too far out of line, try to become a tyrant over your own band, and the group's answer wasn't negotiation, it was removal. You go from being a member of the most cooperative species on the planet to being a single hairless primate with dull nails and flat teeth, alone in a landscape built to eat you. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If exile was essentially a death sentence, how did anyone ever come back from it? The honest answer is, mostly they didn't. But there are scattered stories, passed down through oral traditions across multiple cultures of individuals who survived exile and returned, and those stories tend to share a strange detail. The ones who made it usually didn't do it alone for long. They found another group, a different band, a neighboring tribe, sometimes former enemies who took them in. And this, more than fire or spears or clever tools, might be one of the most underrated survival technologies our species ever developed: the ability to be adopted by strangers. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, are almost universally hostile to outsiders trying to join their troop. A stranger chimp wandering into unfamiliar territory is often attacked, sometimes killed. Humans, for reasons still debated by anthropologists, developed a workaround. Shared rituals, trade routes, intermarriage between distant groups, even simple gestures of hospitality, all of it created a kind of social safety net that stretched beyond your own immediate band. If your own group turned on you, there was occasionally somewhere else to go. It wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't common. But it existed, and it may have been the difference between exile meaning certain death and exile meaning a brutal, terrifying second chance. Here's the thing that should genuinely unsettle you. You don't live in a Pleistocene band anymore. You're not going to freeze to death or get pulled apart by a cave hyena because your tribe stopped sharing meat with you. And yet, somehow, none of that fear went anywhere. Look at what still wrecks people emotionally in the modern world. Being left on red, watching a friend group make plans without you, getting laid off and losing the identity that came with a job, scrolling past a party you weren't invited to. None of these things threaten your actual survival. Nobody is going to die because a group chat excluded them. But your nervous system doesn't know that because your nervous system is still running software built for a world where being excluded and being killed were basically the same outcome, just on a different timer. That ache you feel when you're left out isn't an overreaction. It's an alarm system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Tens of thousands of years after the emergency it was designed for stopped being quite so lethal. Which maybe explains why loneliness itself has started to get talked about, by researchers and public health officials alike, less like an emotion and more like an actual health risk. Something closer to smoking or obesity in terms of its long-term toll on the body. That's not a coincidence, and it's not modern life being uniquely cruel. It's an ancient alarm going off in a world that no longer matches the threat it was built to detect. Your ancestors who felt nothing when the group turned away from them didn't make it. The ones who felt it like a wound, who fought, apologized, changed, begged, adapted, anything to stay inside the circle of firelight, those are the ones whose blood is running through you right now. So the next time exclusion stings more than it logically should, that's not weakness. That's hundreds of thousands of years of your ancestors' fear, all still perfectly intact, still convinced that being cast out means the dark is about to close in around you, exactly like it always used to.